You see this right here? This is the difference between what's morally right and what's legal. The laws that govern your life, they're not real. Not in any meaningful sense, not in any cosmic sense. They're not handed down from on high. They weren't etched into stone by the universe. They were written by other human beings, most of them corrupt, all of them mortal, and a suspicious number of them wearing very expensive suits. That piece of paper that says you need permission to earn a living, to own land, to put something in your own body, that's not law. That's a memo. And somewhere along the way, we all agreed to pretend the memo was God. So what is natural law? Natural law is not a political opinion. It's not a fringe theory. It's one of the oldest and most consistent ideas in the history of human thought. The concept is simple. There exists an order to reality, a design, if you will, that precedes any human institution. It doesn't require legislature. It doesn't require enforcement. It simply is. In other words, you don't need a law to tell you not to poison a river. The river will tell you, eventually, loudly. You don't need a statute to understand that taking something that isn't yours causes harm. That understanding is built in. It's encoded in the fabric of what we are as beings, embedded in a natural order. Men like Thoreau understood this. In Civil Disobedience, he wrote that a higher law, a moral law, supersedes the decrees of any government. That if the law requires you to be an instrument of injustice, then break the law. Because your conscience is a more legitimate authority than any legislature. Lysander Spooner, one of the sharpest legal minds of the 19th century, went even further. He argued that no human being can be morally bound by a contract they never consented to. The Constitution? You never signed it. Your parents never signed it. And the people who wrote it have been dead for over 200 years. So who exactly gave it authority over your life? That's not a radical question. That's just logic. Now let me go a layer deeper, because this isn't just a political problem. It's a spiritual one. In Gnostic tradition, the material world, the world of governments, of institutions, of hierarchies, and of control, is not the product of divine perfection. It is the product of the demiurge, a lesser, flawed creator. An architect of illusion who constructs systems that mimic order while actually perpetuating bondage. Sound familiar? The Gnostics weren't crazy. They were perceptive. They looked at the world around them, at empire, at religious authority, at the machinery of control, and they said, this is not the work of a perfect divine intelligence. This is a counterfeit, a copy of something real, distorted almost beyond recognition. Human law is the demiurge's greatest trick. It takes the genuine principle, do no harm, live in accordance with nature, honor what is real, and it buries it under 80,000 pages of federal code that nobody has read, enforced by people with guns and the legal authority to ruin your life if you fail to comply. That's not divine order. That is a cage that learned to call itself civilization. Let's talk about where human law actually comes from, because the history is instructive and infuriating. Rome, the great civilization. The law of Rome was sophisticated, layered, admired to this day in law schools. It was also built on slavery. The Roman legal system codified the ownership of human beings. It gave masters the legal right to unalive their slaves. It granted Roman citizens rights it explicitly denied to everyone else. Was that law? Sure. Was it legitimate? Not even for a second. Then came feudalism. Kings and lords dividing land they didn't create, couldn't actually own in any natural sense, and distributing access to it based on who had the biggest army and whose grandfather conquered whose other grandfather. The serfs who worked that land for generations had no legal claim to it, not because natural law said so, but because human law said so. Because the people with power wrote the rules to protect the people with power. Shocking, I know. Try to contain your surprise. And then, colonialism. European powers sailing to lands where people had been living in complex, functioning societies for thousands of years, planting a flag and declaring with a straight face that this land now belonged to the crown because law, because doctrine of discovery, because some pope in Rome wrote a document in 1452 saying Christians had the right to claim any land not inhabited by other Christians. That was the law, written by humans, enforced by humans, used to justify centuries of genocide, enslavement, and theft. Are you starting to see the pattern yet? Now, let's bring the point home. Let's talk about right now. You want to cut someone's hair for money? You need a license. The state needs to know about it. You need to pay for it, pass a test, and get their approval, or you're a criminal. You want to collect rainwater that falls on your own property? In several US states, that's regulated. The water that falls from the sky onto your land isn't legally yours. It belongs to the state water authority because law. You earn money through the labor of your own body and mind. The government takes a cut. Not because you agreed to it, not because you signed a contract, but because they decided that they're entitled to the product of your labor, and they have enough armed agents to make that decision stick. Men like Kropotkin saw this clearly. He argued that the state and its laws exist primarily to protect the privileges of the propertied class, to maintain a system of artificial scarcity and enforced compliance that benefits those at the top of the hierarchy. The law doesn't protect you. The law protects the arrangement. And you happened to live inside the arrangement. Now, none of this means there's no such thing as genuine wrongdoing. Natural law is not chaos. Natural law says, do not harm others, do not take what is not yours, and honor the sovereignty of other conscious beings. Those aren't controversial principles. Most humans, cross-culturally, throughout history, agree on them intuitively. The problem is that human law hijacks those principles, wraps them in bureaucracy, weaponizes them selectively, and uses them to extract compliance and revenue from a population that has been conditioned from birth to believe that the permission of the state is required to simply exist. So what do you do with this? First, recognize the conditioning. You've been taught since childhood that law equals morality, that legal equals right, and illegal equals wrong. That is one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in human history. Legal and moral are not synonyms. They have never been synonyms. Slavery was legal. The Holocaust was legal. Apartheid was legal. The Trail of Tears was legal. The law has never been a reliable guide to what is right. It has always been a reflection of what is powerful. Second, locate your actual moral compass. Natural law isn't complicated. It doesn't require a PhD or a law degree. It requires you to ask one question. Does this cause genuine harm to another sovereign being? If no, it's none of the state's business. Full stop. Your body, your choices, your labor, your land, your relationships, none of these require government approval to be legitimate. Third, stop conferring legitimacy on systems that have not earned it. Every time you say, well, it's the law, as if that settles a moral question, you are doing their work for them. You're reinforcing a system that was designed by the powerful for the powerful and handed to you as though it were natural. It isn't. It is constructed, and what is constructed can be deconstructed. Here's the thing about cages. The most effective ones aren't made of iron. They're made of belief. The belief that the cage is necessary. The belief that the cage is normal. The belief that without the cage, everything falls apart. But the divine order, the real one, the one written into the fabric of nature itself, doesn't need a cage. It never did. The cage needs you to believe in it. So stop.